Welcome everybody, Mr. Clark here. Today in Financial Algebra we're talking about rentals, condominiums, and cooperatives. The difference between them is pretty basic. When it comes to a rental, whether it's a house or an apartment, you are not on the hook for like a new water heater or a furnace or maybe a tree crashes in a windstorm and puts a hole in the roof, right? Leaky, flooded basement, things like that. That's not on you. You're covered for most of those things. Again, though, you should always check the rental agreement, the lease, and make sure you know what's in your contract before you sign. If it's a really complex one, get a lawyer in there to make sure you're not signing into something that you shouldn't be doing, right? When it comes to utilities, things like that, you're probably going to have to pay for things like that. That's pretty common. Sometimes they'll include them in an apartment because it's just easier for them to calculate one big lump utility and then just include it some way in the rent for everybody. Rent can go up in price, right? So it can rise a little bit. Each time it's time to renew the lease, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, depending on what contract. A year is pretty common for rent. Condominium is more like, it's almost like owning a home, but not. The commons, so like the grounds, the decks, the roof, the walls, anything on the outside of the whole complex is paid for by everybody in a big pool of money called the maintenance fee. Anything inside the walls, that's you. That's like your ownership. You own it. You can do what you want. You can knock down a wall as long as it's not any structurally type of scenario where it's going to cause problems or whatever. You can do any kind of thing like that. That's yours, and the upkeep is required on your end, just like a home. And then a cooperative, you don't really own the home. You own a percentage of a corporation essentially. You live there, but you're actually not living, you're not paying for that space that's yours. You're paying a percentage, just like a stock for a company. So let's get into a couple of the calculations for this, and we'll get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is some maintenance fee. I mentioned a condominium is going to have a maintenance fee that covers taking care of the grounds, the property on the outside, right? Things like that. Usually it's a percentage of property taxes. So let's do an example. Let's say Bert, right, pays $912. This is a monthly condominium maintenance fee. Of that $912, 15% goes to the monthly property taxes. So we want to know how much he's paying in a year. We would take that 912 times the 15%. I believe that's 136.80. And then you take that over the course of a year, so times 12, I get 1,641.60. So that's the first calculation, just to know how much we're paying in property taxes, what part of our monthly maintenance fee is going to the grounds. Simple, easy to figure out first calculation that we're going to do. The next calculation you'll see in the homework, and the next thing we're going to talk about, which is going to be pretty basic. So when a cooperative, the way it's set up is you are a shareholder. It's owned by all the shareholders. So let's say we have a Janet. Make sure we're in the right one. There we go. So we're Janet here, and we have 550 shares of this cooperative. Again, it's just like an investment. And there's a total shares are 50,000. So whenever we're doing a percent of the whole, just like if you say I've got 8 out of 10 points correct, I have an 80%. 550 out of, just realized that should be 50,000. Sorry about that. So 550 out of, there we go, 50,000. That gives me 0.011 or 1.1%. Again, the total doesn't have to be 100. 1 out of 100 is 10%. 1%. 1 out of 10 would be 10%, and 1 out of 1, 100%, right? That's all based off a nice even 10. relationship or ratio for the numerator and the denominator. This could be some random odd number. We talked about owning shares of stock. So let's say I own 10 shares of a stock, and of the total, another person owns 15, another person owns 23. Obviously, that's not an even 100. We have 23, 33, 43, 48 total. I own 10 out of, right? And so that's how I do the math. The total down here and what we have is how we get the percentage, that relationship. That's what's going on there. Now, going into the next bit, this one I think is highly useful. I don't know if we'll need this or not. Let's just pull up the table actually. So this next bit right here, we're talking about renting versus owning. And this is a common question. So let's say we're moving to a new city. We know they're going to be there for 10 years. And we're not sure whether we should buy or rent. So we know eventually we're going to want to return to our home city. So we are eventually going to sell this house if we buy, or eventually we're going to terminate the lease. We talk about something in here. There's a piece that we want to discuss, which is this. And that is the rent is going to change. We think about rent and what's happening with rent. Rent over time rises, typically speaking. Now, obviously, it can fall if the housing market is doing really well. Rent's going to not do as well. If the housing market tanks, then rent starts to do better, right? We kind of go one way or the other. If we're not renting, we're buying, or vice versa, right? So there's an equation that we can use to talk about a yearly rent, and it's going to be a function of what year we're in and any kind of change. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this in here, and then we'll talk about the parts. So this is just our rent. A is our annual rent. I probably should just keep consistent, right? We talk about our rate of increase. Now, I don't know why the book has it as this. I don't remember the reasoning behind that value, but that's okay. And then we talk about the year we are in. That's this setup here. So, for example, if our rent was 800, our annual rent would be 800 times 12. That's this piece here. 1 plus, we'd say our rate of increase is 2%. We can say 2 is a number over 100, right? If we want to. I'm just going to say it's 2% or 0.02. So let's do that. We'll write it as this, and then we'll know that that's going to be 0.02. And then 1 minus 1. Now we know this is going to cancel, or sorry, this is going to become 1. And so we're really just going to have 800 times 12, and that gives me 9,600. In year 2, same setup, 800 times 12, or same rate. We're saying the rate of increase is this, and then 2 minus 1, and that gives me 97.92 as my rent for that year. Again, it's annual, and we could break that out into 12 months and figure what that is. On my spreadsheet here, I'm using that same setup, that 2%, just assuming a yearly inflation rate, an initial start of, let's say our rent is $2,500, and I'm going for 10 years. I have my total rent paid for that year. There we go. And so we know the first year we're just going to pay the $30,000. That's just 25 times 12. The next year we have that inflation. I fixed a few cells in here to always use that same number, right? And then this is our running rent paid. So at the end of 10 years, we will have paid $328,000. Now looking over at the mortgage, now mortgage is different, right? I mean, there's a lot of factors, so it's hard to make a complete and perfect estimate of what we should be doing. But when it comes to a mortgage, there's a couple of things that we want to consider, and that is we're paying interest and we are paying principal. We're developing equity, and if we are going to be going back home in 10 years, then we're going to be selling this thing, right? And so when we talk about a mortgage, we talk about our beginning balance. Let's say we're getting a loan for $350,000. So he's buying a house for In our example, I think I have it as he's putting down a down payment of $100,000, so he's buying it for $450,000, which means he needs to sell it for at least that, right? He's got his monthly payment, which I've calculated. Monthly payment again is just that same setup where we take our principal times our rate over 12, 1 plus our rate over 12 power of 12 times the time. How many years? Again, it's in years, so 0.5 years we would, or half a year would be, or 6 months would be 0.5, right, is a decimal. And then all that divided by the same rate over n. And this piece is important. You must make sure that that -1 comes into here, and to make sure that this division happens after all of this. The other one is to make sure that this happens first and then multiply by principal. Things like that. If your calculator makes it weird, that's why. So at the end of this, I went ahead into the very bottom here and calculated that he spent $176,000 in interest, $224,000 in principal, which means he has $124,000 plus his $100,000 original down payment, so $224,140 in equity, which means he's still going to owe the bank some money, right? Let's say he sells it for exactly the amount he bought it. He originally spent $400,000. That's the total, or that's how much he's paid total over the life of the loan in interest, as well as his principal and as his down payment, right? All that stuff is put in. That's what he needs to recoup if he wants to break even. However, we understand there's other factors at play, right? He could have made lots of major adjustments in the house. He could have done a lot of maintenance and a lot of repairs and things like that. We're not calculating that. Let's say he sells for $450. He pays off the loan, which is $225,859. He gets from the sale, again, we're talking about closing costs and all that. He gets from the sale $224,141. If you think about it, over the course of 10 years, he really only paid $176,760.04. That's just the original payment, add back the $450, and then he's going to sell. He's going to pay back the bank part of that $450 sale price, keep some for himself. He nets just a -$176, whereas in the other one, his total was accumulated rent paid was $328. So in this scenario, I would say probably buy the house, right? Whether he sells or not. It's going to be a better option because that $328 is non-refundable. He's not getting any of that back. Over here, he is getting a portion back, the amount that he paid in. And assuming the sale price doesn't go less or over, that's where he's at. If he makes more, if he sells for $500,000, then he's going to reduce some of his costs a little bit, right? He decides not to sell the place, stays because he loves it, whatever. That's the setup for those. Again, when it comes to this calculation, we talk about the rent side. When we're doing that piece, we are simply taking our rent being equal to whatever our annual rent was this year, and we take that times 1 plus the rate increase. So in our scenario, we said it was 2%, and we do that for whatever year we're in minus 1, and that's that year's rent. So if year 1, there we go. Again, we want to call this rent for year 2. You would have something like, and I'm just putting the O2 because why do the fraction, right? 2 minus 1, rent from year N, so any year we want, so whatever number we're going to put in here, you submit whatever you want for N. That's the rent for that year. You still have to go and do a cumulative total because that's just that one value. So to get this calculation, that's what's happening here. So I've got one more option here. We're going to do just one more scenario. So let's say we buy we're going to buy in for a co-op, and we're going to go back in time. Let's say in 2000s, the price of cooperative apartments soared a bunch until 2009 when we got just slammed with a recession. So let's say in 1995, we'll go back a few years. Let's say we were going to buy a condo for 98,000. Now this is the purchase price. We get a loan for 75, right? So we're already putting money into this. We're already putting in what, $23,000 of our own money. So, again, we know what happens coming up here in the recession, but we've already done that. This is, however, the loan. And this is the amount that the bank is going to be loaning us. We're going to pay money on this over time, right? Well, time goes by and the value of the home drops to 61,000. This cooperative, right? This investment. Well, that's already a loss because, again, if you think about it, we took out a loan for 75,000. And the value of the condo is not even worth that, and we already paid 23 up here, so we're already sitting at a loss of $23,000. Stinks, but you know what? There are people that did just that or worse around that time frame. So during the course of time, we've paid off part of this loan, and say we borrowed 75,000. The price dips down to 61,000. Our equity at that time, how much loan we paid off, is 6,700 or 6,744, right? So when it comes to deciding to sell, how much are we going to have to pay back the bank? Well, of the 75, we've already paid off 6,744. So we still owe the bank 68,256. If we sell this place for 61,000, we just happen to get lucky and sell it for that value, we're going to end up owing the bank still another 7,256. Closing costs plus this plus the 23,000 originally, because we had to buy this place for 98 and we only got a loan for 75. We're spending over $30,000 to get ourselves out of this. Or if you want to say, we're losing over $30,000 to pay off the bank, right? That's huge. Unfortunately, again, that kind of stuff happened. And so when you think about stuff like that, it really is kind of tough to consider whether we want to buy, we want to sell, rent, or deal with that. Again, on one side of the coin, you have renting. You don't have anything to show for it when you're done, except you lived your life there, and that's important. But there's nothing tangible that you can say now that money went to something. You buy a home and it's at that same token. You spend a lot of money to buy the place, to repair the place, to upkeep it, to then sell it, and you may be at a loss. But again, as we saw in that example, and in this example here, at the end of the day, that loss has been mitigated or reduced by a little bit. It's not so bad. This isn't as bad as 328,000 found here, right? So anyways, that is the lesson. If you have questions, please shoot me an email. Let me know. This will be the last one we do for Chapter 8. We have only 3 more sections for Chapter 9 that we're going to do videos for, and then we'll wrap up and get ready for graduation. Super excited for you all. Best of luck. Please ask questions if you have them. Until next time, see ya.